Today we continue our NHL offseason plan series. We're looking at the 30th place team from the regular season, the Anaheim Ducks. What moves should we expect from them in the offseason? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're continuing on with our NHL offseason plan series. So we're going to take a look at how the regular season was, do a quick review of some team statistics. We're going to take a look at what their salary cap situation is, what contracts are coming up that they have to address either as RFAs or UFAs, and then we're going to look at the 5 burning questions of what needs to be addressed with this team during the offseason and what moves we should expect them to make as we get forward here into the summertime. So let's first get started with a quick review of the Anaheim Ducks regular season. So obviously, like I said, we know things did not go well. They finished 30th in the NHL. They finished with a record of 17, 30, and 9 for 43 points. They had a really bad goal differential with a minus 53. So even with a solid goaltender like John Gibson between the pipes, they still failed to give up way too many goals and not score nearly enough. Looking at their special teams, the power play was one of the worst power plays we've seen in a long time, and actually might be one of the worst power plays, I think, since this stat's been compiled. They had an 8.9 success rate for the dead last in the NHL. Absolutely horrendous. The PK was middle of the pack at 79.9% for 16th best. So that was, average at best, so not too bad. Of course, because of finishing 30th overall, they're going to get a really high pick in the 2021 NHL Draft coming up later this summer. Of course, they have really good odds. There's only 2 lottery spots now, so they're guaranteed to pick no worse than 4th. However, they could end up with 1st or 2nd or even 3rd. So they're going to end up with a really good prospect with that draft selection, and we'll discuss that a little bit further here coming up as well. And they have $22.5 million in salary cap space. But of course, we're going to take a look now at the contracts for the Ducks and what players are on expiring deals that are either restricted or unrestricted free agents. And we'll see where that money needs to go and how much of that really is going to be available to make other moves with. So looking at the contract situation here, as you can see, we have a decent amount of players on both sides. On the RFA front, we have forwards Danton Heinen, Isaac Lundestrom, Max Jones, Sam Steele, Max Comtois, and Alexander Volkov. So all these guys are potentially important pieces to the future. Now, we could see maybe 1 or 2 traded. I mean, there is some talk that the Ducks might be making some big moves this offseason as well, which we'll get into here in the 5 burning questions. But those are all guys for the most part. I would be, surprised if they were not extended qualifying offers and they will sign to some sort of contract moving forward. I would think maybe Heinen's the most likely who could be moved, but it just depends on what deals are out there. Now, on the UFA list, we've got Captain Ryan Getzlaf. We're obviously going to have to discuss his future coming up. He's been with the Ducks a long time, a big part of the franchise. David Backes, who's not going to be returning, likely going to be retiring. We've got Andy Welenski, Ryan Miller, who's already announced that he's not coming back. Miller's going to be retiring as well. And then we also have Carter Rowney, who ended up finishing the season on injured reserve. So for the most part, I would think the only possibility of a return would be Getzlaf. But as I said, his future with the team is going to be one of our 5 burning questions that we'll get into here a little bit more in a few minutes. But also the other thing that all these teams have to think about this offseason as well, not only what are they going to be getting at the 2021 NHL Draft, but we have a new team entering the league with Seattle, and the Kraken are going to be having an expansion draft coming up not too distant future from now. So all teams are going to lose a player, with the exception of Vegas Golden Knights, who had that written into their agreement when they became an expansion team themselves a few years ago. So who might the Ducks be at most risk to losing? Well, as I mentioned, a guy like Danton Heinen could be available. Won't be shocked if he's left unavailable here, or unprotected, I should say, to the Kraken as a possibility. But the Ducks, for the most part, I think they're going to be in a tough situation with a lot of good blue liners. I would suspect they can either go with 7 skaters, like 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and a goalie, or they can go with just 8 skaters overall. So that makes it tough. But if you're going to go the route of protecting 3 defensemen, you have to think Cam Fowler's number 1, Hampus Lindholm's likely number 2, Josh Manson's likely number 3. That's going to leave a couple of guys like Shattenkirk and Hayden Fleury and Larson all could be exposed. So that's a possible player who could get plucked right there. I think there's a good possibility that the Kraken could go for a defenseman here on the Anaheim Ducks situation. They could also expose a few veteran forwards like Adam Henrique, for example, who likely, for what he's getting paid, certainly did not live up to his end of the bargain on the stat sheet this year. So I would think that they probably won't lose him, and they know that, so they could expose him to be able to protect more of their younger players. A lot of those RFAs that I mentioned need to be protected. Obviously, they're all have more than 2 years experience now, so they have to be protected or they'll be available as well. So, players like Lundstrom, Jones, Steele, Comtois, Volkov, etc., or maybe not Volkov, but the other ones for sure. You get Troy Terry in there, you get Ricard Raquel, and others that, the Ducks are going to end up losing a pretty decent player no matter how we shake it here. Now let's jump into the 5 burning questions for this franchise. What are the main things that this team needs to address this offseason, and what questions do they need to answer? Well, first and foremost for me is the future of Captain Ryan Getzlaf. Does Ryan Getzlaf move on? Does he return? If so, what does that look like? It's a big question moving forward. Now, it's believed that Getzlaf was open to waiving his no-move clause with GM Bob Murray for a trade at the NHL deadline, but it seemed like the only place he was really willing to go to was the Vegas Golden Knights. That's what we had heard from NHL insiders leading up to the deadline, that he, for the most part, didn't really want to go, but he would consider Vegas, and that was really the only scenario. Now, I'm not sure how far things got. I don't think talks really got too far. I think the Vegas Golden Knights kind of didn't really have a lot of salary cap space, and that would have been a difficult move for them to pull off. Clearly, if Ryan Getzlaf does return to the Ducks, it won't be anywhere near the $8 million cap hit that he's making today. So obviously, I do think there's a chance that Bob Murray would want Getzlaf to stick around, sign a short-term contract. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's a couple years. I'm not sure. I don't think it would be too terribly long. Continue being the captain of the team and kind of help take this team to the next generation of young players, as they do need some veteran guys around them who can help insulate them and kind of help lead the way. Now, of course, the other veterans, though, including Getzlaf, who had a bit of a down season, that you could argue that the vets on this team is what really let them down this year. The scoring was atrocious, including the power play, and obviously a lot of the veteran guys, you have to wonder, will they be back? It's not just Getzlaf. The vets on this team really caused a lot of issues on the team when it comes to the lack of production. So Getzlaf, I think, has a decent chance to remain on a short-term deal and lead them, but he could even opt for retirement. There was some talk about that. I don't know if there's really much to it, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. But he certainly could continue to be the captain on this team on a short-term contract. And of course, as we talked about as well, Ryan Miller's retiring. So who is going to be the backup goaltender next year? That's certainly a big question mark as well. John Gibson can carry the workload. He's one of the top goalies in the NHL. Especially if he's got a better team in front of him, that certainly makes a big difference. But do they go with a guy like Anthony Stolarz that's already in the organization? Do they go with a youngster like Lucas Dostal? Dostal had a tremendous season in Europe previously, was doing phenomenal, and I think he's deserving of an opportunity. I personally think the Ducks likely remain in-house on this one. I don't think they really need to go outside of the organization. Wouldn't be a complete shocker if they found a veteran guy on a cheap one-year deal, but I'm not even sure they really need to go down that road. Clearly, the Ducks are going to be a little while getting back to being competitive and more prominent again, so why not give the youngster an opportunity to play with Gibson? We know Gibson will play the bulk of the games and get him some experience. To me, that would be the wise move, but we'll see how the Ducks decide to handle that situation. Now, there's also some talk that GM Bob Murray might make some big moves and swing for the fences here. Like, could we see him in on a guy like Jack Eichel? They certainly have some interesting young players that we've already talked about, many of which are RFAs. You throw in some other guys like Troy Terry, and you get first-round picks that could be included. Even some other players that you wouldn't think would be available, but like a Trevor Zegras, a Jamie Drysdale. They do have some interesting pieces there that the Sabres would probably be interested in looking at, and I would imagine that if they were going to pull that kind of deal off, though, that Drysdale and Zegras likely would be untouchable, but you just never know what Murray would be willing to give up in that kind of a scenario. But there is a lot of speculation that they will be making some, or at least attempting to, doesn't mean they'll be successful, making some big strides here. Like other veteran players as well could find themselves on the go. They move out enough other salary, they could certainly handle the $10 million cap hit that comes with Jack Eichel. I would not completely rule out the possibility here that they at least are having a lot of conversations, and I do expect Bob Murray to be aggressive. I'm not sure how successful he'll be with landing a guy like Eichel or something else that might be comparable out there, but still a situation to watch closely if you're a Ducks fan this offseason. Question 4 in the 5 burning questions to me is like what I've already mentioned here. Will we see other vets moved out? Like Adam Henrique, Jacob Silverberg, Ricard Raquel, all had down, disappointing seasons. Some of it was due to injury, but still, I have to think that the Ducks try their best here if they're able to, which is not going to be an easy task, to move out some veteran salary. Henriques is going to be the toughest to move. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in Rakell. I think he's the most likely out of the three to get moved if possible. His name was out there a lot at the NHL trade deadline, and it would not be a shocking turn to see him go. He's a versatile guy, can play center as well as the wing, can play on your special teams. I think Rakell will generate some interest, and a fresh start might be exactly what he needs. A guy like Silfverberg is generally regarded as a pretty good two-way forward. If they want to move on from Silfverberg, I could see that being a scenario that he would generate a decent amount of interest as well. But I think it's, like I said, Rakell's the most likely to go. Silfverberg is, I'm not sure about that. They might hang on to him, especially if Getzlaf sticks around. Those two could kind of be your main two guys. But I think they're probably stuck with Adam Henrique for a little bit longer while they wait for that contract to kind of get closer to its end. And lastly here, the other big burning question is, what should they target with their first round pick in the 2021 NHL Draft? Clearly, like I said before, they're going to have a high pick. It could be first, second, third, fourth, and there's going to be a lot of intriguing players to take a look at that level. Obviously, a lot of who they target is going to determine where they pick. If they're first overall, I think they're most likely taking Owen Power, who's the big, strong, defenseman who's getting comparisons to guys like Victor Hedman. I mean, I think that would be too difficult to pass up. But at the same time, they could really use another up-and-coming center iceman to play with a guy like Trevor Zegras, especially if they don't make a big, significant trade for a guy like Jack Eichel. If they have Zegras in the system and they draft a guy like Matt Beniers, for example, and you keep Ryan Getzlaf in the fold to kind of be their mentor, that could be a solid 1, 2, 3 down the middle for a little while here, and that might be the way to go. However, there's going to be lots of other interesting defensemen besides Power, including guys like Luke Hughes and Brant Clark and even Edmondson as well. So it's going to be interesting to see who they grab, but no matter what they do there, where they end up selecting, they will be getting another really solid prospect to add to the mix here to see how this team can move forward. So that's my opinion on what you should expect from the Anaheim Ducks this offseason. Of course, I'd like to know what your thoughts are, especially to the answers to the 5 burning questions that I posed here today. Let me know what your thoughts are, and we'll continue to discuss it down in the comment section. And of course, stay tuned for the next video for the 29th ranked team from the regular season coming here very shortly. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.